While we're waiting on everybody, if you will take a moment to put your name and site location in the chat, that would be great. We'll get started here in about probably 2 minutes or so. Just a reminder to put your name and site in the chat so we have a record of your attendance. All right, welcome everybody to our Tuesday professional development. And again, today we have Y4Y, the local experts or the national experts. I do want to give you just a quick update to remind you, if you would like, we have a office hours that we're going to offer tomorrow from 11:30 to 12 or 12:30 related to 21st century programming, along with the new state initiatives in math and literacy. So if you're having any questions or issues, or you're planning on applying in the future, wonder how summer programming can work it all out, we hope to answer those questions tomorrow. We're going to have Andrew Maxey from Tuscaloosa come on and show us how they do it. We'll have Dr. Karen Rutledge Bell from ARI come on and talk a little bit about what they're implementing and how they're putting it out to roll into the 21st century when they're through with their programs or in conjunction with their programs. So hopefully, if you can attend. If you don't have the link, just let Dr. Pines or Dr. Pines or Erica or myself know, and we will get that to you. Then, if you noticed last Friday in Erica's email, we are going to have a get together in the fall per se, along with the fall conference, which is in September in Montgomery. So just save your date. We'll get you a lot more information on that, but we will have some training before we actually start our programming in October for those that are new and go into compliance monitoring. Congratulations to those who are almost through with your compliance monitoring or on that 60-day window. We should be finished up pretty quickly, and then we will have our cohort 15 closeouts that we'll start scheduling. But we've been very impressed with all the things going on out there. So congratulations on a job well done. This time, I'm going to turn it over to Erica for any announcements she might have.
None.
And she's coming off spring break. I understand that. All right, Yanni, I'm going to let y'all take it over and tell you again how much we appreciate you being here and taking us through this capacity building for the whole spring, and so that we're ready to go for next year. It's all yours.
Thank you, Annette, so much for having us. And thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Today, we are going to be talking about implementing activities with Fidelity, which is going to have a lot of relevance for those of you that are in the process of compliance monitoring, thinking about that continuous improvement process. So we are so excited to get started today. Before we dive into the content, we are going to play a quick disclaimer from the Department of Education.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number ED-ESE 14D0008 with Synergy Enterprises Incorporated. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, methodology, technique, or enterprise mentioned here is intended or should be inferred.
All right.
Alrighty, now that we have
All
played that, my name is Yana Wist, and I have been an education specialist with the U.S. Department of Education's Y4Y team for a little over 3 years. And I'm excited to dive into this conversation because thinking about how we implement our activities is really one of my favorite parts and what I like to focus on coming from my background in curriculum. And I am joined by my colleague, Shanika Peck. Hey, Shanika.
Hey, Yana. Thank you, everyone. So happy to be back with everyone. I'm the lead education specialist with the Y4Y technical assistance team. I've been with Y4Y for a little over a year. I'm coming in from an extended day year-round boarding school for inner city kids back in New Jersey. So I'm really excited to really talk about different strategies and techniques you can use to make sure you're implementing activities with Fidelity, but also a lot of great techniques and resources will be shared to help with future planning of these activities.
Awesome. Thanks, Shanika. So our objectives for today are we're going to talk about designing high quality activities to accomplish our program goals. We're going to talk about how you can understand and apply the Fidelity of implementation process. And we're going to highlight a whole bunch of resources from Y4Y that will help you to implement high quality programs. And all our resources are absolutely free and customizable. So we will share tons of resources that you can use to support your program implementation. So with that, we do want to just start with the question of why is it so important to implement with Fidelity? And really what it comes down to is our entire goal is to create programs that serve our students. And when we implement our activities as planned, we have the option or we have the ability to improve student outcomes, to create a learning environment that will support the learning needs of all of our kids. And with that, we can ourselves become better instructors because, as we all know, I'm sure preparation is absolutely key, and implementing with Fidelity is what allows us to do that. So as you're thinking about how you implement with Fidelity, today we're really focusing on the activity level details. So what do we do as educators, and how do we make sure that we are planning and implementing those high quality programs? And one of the things that we all love is that we get to learn from each other. So we would love to hear from you. If you have a favorite activity that your program offers, we would love to hear from you in the chat box. What is that activity and why do you offer it? And the reason why we're just using that as a starting point is because we're going to continuously reflect on what elements of our program are we implementing as planned and what elements are maybe a little more challenging or we need to make adjustments. I can share that in my program that I oversaw during the summer, my favorite activity was always yoga, and it was part of our SCL curriculum. And well, part of it was, if you've never seen a 5-year-old do yoga, it's just hilarious because they're still working on gross motor control. But it was also because I knew that it connected to helping our students develop self-management, those deep breathing techniques. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat box. If there's an activity that you are doing in your program that you particularly love that serves some particular need of your students, of your program community, we would love to hear from you in the chat box. Shanika, from your most recent program experience, do you have an activity that you want to share that really did a great job meeting student needs? Oops, Shanika's muted. Alrighty. Oh, at Brad's program, they do ballet, and at another site, they do drumline. Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. So having those opportunities probably gives students a great creative outlet, I would bet. And having some of those health and wellness opportunities, getting some exercise in, that's always great too. So thank you, Brad, for sharing that. And again, we'd love to hear from you all in the chat box.
Yes, sorry about that, Yana. I was having trouble unmuting my mic, but one of my favorite activities I like to do with the younger students was an extension of book club where we invited a family to participate in sharing recipes that was connected to the current book that we are reading.
Hey, Shanika, I think something's going on with your screen. There
There
we
it
go.
is.
We've got some fun technology today. All right. So with that in mind, just really carrying forward, thinking about what works in your programs, and if you're not sure, we're hopefully going to hear lots of other great ideas from our group today. We can now sort of start to think about how we really dive into our programs. Now, in our last session, we did talk about the continuous improvement process. And today we're really going to zoom into that implementing with Fidelity phase. We're really going to focus on how do we implement our activities as we plan them. But just as a quick reminder, the continuous improvement process is a 5-step process that starts with the defining phase, where we lay out what we're trying to accomplish in our program, what our plans are, and getting really all of those details in place right from the beginning. And a lot of you have maybe already been familiar with an example that we used. You might remember it from our last session. But to make sure that we are all on the same page for today, we do have some data that we're going to use just as our example. So we know that in this case scenario, 20% of students can add and subtract fractions at a grade appropriate level. And we want to give students opportunities to use the real world math applications with hands-on activities so that they gain comfort with that math topic. So we've decided that the way we're going to do that is with a cooking club. And you may remember this SMART goal that 80% of students who attend regularly will demonstrate an increase of 30 percentage points or more on the fractions and measurement assessment as measured by the fall pre-test and spring post-test. And this is an example of a really specific goal that tells you how we're going to measure it. We're going to use a specific assessment. It's achievable, so we're setting a goal that we think we can meet. It is relevant to what our students need to learn. They need to develop those fraction and percentage skills. And finally, it is time bound because we are setting a deadline by the spring when we are going to deliver that assessment. And so when we have chosen that activity, we then want to create a more specific goal just for that cooking club. So in the cooking club, our activity goal is that students who regularly participate in cooking club will write their own recipe and follow another group's recipe as measured by the rubric at the end of the 6-week series. So we would love to hear from you if this is something that you have ever encountered. We want to deepen and make this a little bit more of a specific goal. So you may have noticed that here we don't lay out the exact details of who we want to target and what our goals are for how many students are going to achieve this. So we want to make this a slightly stronger goal. And to do that, here's our slightly stronger goal. We have 90% of students who regularly participate in the cooking club, so we're much more specific. Will demonstrate their fractions and measurement skills by writing their own recipe and following another group's recipe as measured by the rubric at the end of the 6-week period. So what we saw in this more detailed goal is that we have set that time period. It's relevant to what our student needs. It's an achievable amount. It's something that we can easily measure. And so now that we've done a lot of that pre-work, this is where we're going to dive into our activity. And we're getting ready to talk about our main focus today, that fidelity of implementation. But when we write that activity, the things you need to include in your activity plan include just a general description of the activity you want to do, what you're expecting students to produce, what the final product will be, how long you expect the program to last, and what supplies you need. So let's take a look at the activity plan for our program, for our cooking club activity. So the description is, it's snack time. Follow salsa recipes, then create your own in cooking club. We know that what we want our students to accomplish is we want them to follow 2 recipes correctly, and we want them to create a new recipe. The time we've allotted for this is we're going to have 12 sessions that are 35 minutes each. We've also laid out the ingredients we need. We need safety knives, cutting boards, measuring cups and spoons, bowls, and all those ingredients. So now that we have really defined our goal and defined the activity that we're going to do, now we're ready to figure out how are we going to, oopsie, Shanika, that might have been me. Sorry, Shanika, I did something. I'm gonna stop touching. There we go. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Zoom now has an option where you can control the other person's screen. It's very stressful. All right, so thank you. So now we are really to talk about how are we going to implement our activities with Fidelity? How are we going to make sure that our program meets those goals as we've laid them out? And so when we get to implementing with Fidelity, we understand that there's 4 primary components. So first of all, we know that one of the first components is we know that one of the first components is what's known as adherence. So adherence is just sticking with the plan, doing what we said we would do. But it's not always easy. Sometimes things get in the way. So there's a lot of barriers to adherence. One of them we encountered fairly recently when we all had to go virtual because of COVID. That was an unplanned event. Sometimes we have our great plans and we find out that our students are missing foundational skills that make it really hard for them to do the activity as planned. Sometimes things run over or there's special events or a program needs to be canceled because of weather events. So we lose time and we don't have enough time to get these activities done. And sometimes we just forget why things are important, what our actual goals are. And those can all get in the way of our ability to implement our activity just as we planned it. So we would love to do a fun little activity with you all where we check out some of the examples of whether you think this adheres to our plan. Remember, we had that general plan of students are going to make salsa recipes. And we would love for you to do this activity with us where we're going to read one of these scenarios. And then you're going to let us know if you think this adheres to the plan, yes or no. So our first scenario is the ingredients and utensils were out on the tables when the students arrived. Do you think that would adhere to our plan for our program? And you can use the reaction buttons that are along the bottom of your screen. And if you click on reactions, you should see yes or no, green and red buttons, to let us know if you think this would help us adhere to our plan of having students make the salsa. And if you have any ideas, if this brings up any thoughts for you, we would love to hear from you in the chat box as well. Hey, so yeah, exactly. This would adhere with the plan because we do want to have some of that just organizational work done for our kids so we're not all scrambling for supplies. What if your staff pre-measure all the ingredients for the younger students to reduce mess? Would that help us stick to that plan of using cooking to help students practice those math skills? Let us know in the chat box. Or using those reaction buttons.
And Yana, while we're thinking about adherence here, I also think it's important for everyone to keep in mind our goals for the activity. So depending on the goal, we may or may not be adhering to the plan if staff is pre-measuring ingredients. And we want our students to learn how to measure or use tools to measure. So that will be an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Mhm. And if we remember that our goal was originally that we want to have our kids learn those measurement skills, because we know that a lot of cooking is really measuring using fractions, then that's not going to help them. Yep, I see some of those red X's. Thank you, everyone. What about assigning your students roles of a sous chef, a kitchen porter, a food critic, and a recipe book writer? I think the word writer got cut off there. Yes, I'm seeing some green yeses pop up. So having dividing those roles can help our students work more efficiently. And I think a lot of us know that when students have defined roles, they tend to work much more effectively in small groups. So those things can help your students be really effective in that project. And finally, what if your staff told your students to taste and add ingredients a little at a time to get the best flavor? Would that help us with those ultimate goals of using the recipes to practice those fraction skills, as an example? So this one is getting a mixed response. And it'll probably depend on how you implement it. If you have your students add things a tablespoon at a time and then ask them to add it up so they have a final count on what they've accomplished, that can be a great way to help them practice those additional fraction skills, adding fractions with different denominators. What happens when you add half a tablespoon and a quarter of a tablespoon? So those kinds of things can also be great ways of doing it. But if students are just adding ingredients and going by taste and not tracking their measurements, then it just becomes a cooking club, which is fun, but is not helping us meet the academic goals. And as a reminder, when we're making food purchases, while food is generally an unallowable expense, making those purchases for an academic goal, like a cooking club where students practice their fractions, can be a great method. So if we're not meeting those academic goals, we're also not going to be using the money as intended. So thank you everyone for participating and really thinking through adherence with me. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Shanika, who's going to talk us through more of the really meat of our conversation of how do we implement with Fidelity.
Thank you, Yana. And like what Yana mentioned about barriers to adherence, it's really important that we keep in mind of the things that we can and cannot control. And that also relates to dosage here. So, oftentimes we expect students to attend our activities as planned, but because of absences or early dismissals, that may prevent us from adhering to the plan, and also making sure that students are receiving the right amount of dosage to our activities so that they can practice those skills that we planned for them to practice with our activities. So, low dosage can also lead to a result of poor student engagement in our activities, or of course, other issues that may arise that are out of the activity leader's control. So what we're going to do is think more about what we can control in this sense. So we're going to return back to that cooking club activity and think about ways that we can focus on how we can improve dosage. So let's say 3 students have not received the planned dosage. What can the activity leader do to improve this? So let's say we had a few students who missed majority of the days in this activity. What can we do to improve that? And again, we're thinking about what we can control, because sometimes this actually happens a lot, right? Especially around the time where there are conflicting events happening during the school day. Maybe there's a basketball game and students aren't able to participate in your activity. What can we do to improve dosage in that sense? And of course, you can let us know in the chat. There's quite a few of us here, so if you feel comfortable, you can also unmute your mic and share what an activity leader may do to improve their dosage of this activity. So I know for me, I like to include families in on these activities. So if students are leaving early or they are absent, they can keep track of what's happening in programming whenever I send home the plan for the week. It may also provide some virtual options, right? We're at a point in the year where conducting hybrid activities is a part of the plan when it comes to activity planning and thinking about the things that we can control, like we mentioned before. Yana, do you want to share any other strategies an activity leader can use to improve dosage if students aren't really attending activities as planned? All right. Well, if you have any other strategies, again, feel free to add them to the chat. This is a great opportunity for us to collaborate and share ideas. So again, if you are having issues with dosage, you can share activity plans with caregivers and parents at home so that they can keep track of what's happening. You can also provide variations of this activity so that students can do this outside of programming as well. You may also want to partner with school day staff to see how else we can extend activities into the school day or vice versa. The next measure of fidelity we'll take a look at is engagement. So this is where we're thinking about that active participation students are having when it comes to learning. And this may look different for all of our students, right? There's a different level of interactions a student may have towards your activity. You may have students who are not only raising their hands, but they may also be showing how they are using their critical thinking skills. You may have students who are showing how passionate they are about the topic that you are covering with your activity, or possibly just asking questions to gain a better understanding of their learning or advocating for their learning to a certain degree. So this engagement is speaking more to a student's effort in showing their motivation, as I mentioned before. But this also looks like how you can vary this activity so that all students can participate and show their engagement. So if you have students who aren't always vocal when it comes to participating in their learning, making sure you're providing multiple ways that they can show their engagement into your activity. And so we're thinking about like our different activities that we may provide for our students. So we know engagement may look different across the board when it comes to these activities. So if you have a yoga class, what would engagement look like in yoga versus an activity for book club, or if students are researching online, that type of engagement will look totally different from one that is more physical. So what we'll do is we'll use our annotation tool again. And you are going to look at each of these indicators of engagement, and you can use that an annotation tool to indicate which ones you think will be most effective in your checklist when you go to observe an activity such as the cooking club that we used in the beginning. Again, so you can use your annotation tool, or you can let us know in the chat if that is easier for you. Which one of these indicators of engagement would you be looking for in a cooking club activity? Now, I'm not able, if anyone's annotating their screen, For some reason, I'm not able to see that. Yana, if you can, just let me know if you see anything on your screen. Again, you can also use the chat. Now, when it comes to the cooking club, I think it would be great for to also include staff in testing recipes, right? This is an activity that can easily be introduced as a competition. So showing how students are engaged in one, measuring and using tools for the recipe, but also how they can get the staff to say that their recipe is the best if this is a competition. Awesome. So we have responses in the chat. Testing and refining recipes, right. Students staying on task, right? Especially if you're thinking about an activity that requires students to, give their full and undivided attention. Sometimes that can be difficult after, hours. Group test and refine recipes. That's a good one, Tanya. Students clean up at the end of the activity. Staff test recipes. Yep, I totally agree. Yes, and students sharing ideas, whether it be in a whole group or maybe within their group. But yep, all of these are great indicators of engagement that you can include in your checklist. So don't forget to download that handout that we shared. We also have resources that you can use, especially checklists, and we'll actually go over that in a little bit when it comes to collecting data on student engagement with these activities. So thank you everyone for sharing. And then next, we're going to talk about delivery. So when we deliver a lesson, we're also thinking about how much time we're going to spend on different parts of these lessons. And so typically a lesson will be broken up into these 4 components. You have your anticipatory set, which is where we engage our students. So this can be done through a quick question. It can be a video. You can probably introduce the activity in a way where they're experimenting, or in this case, it's a cooking club. So maybe you would have them taste something or, share their experience with whatever recipe that you are planning to implement or recreate in your activity. Then you have your instruction, and this is where the activity leader or facilitator is providing direct information to students. This may be an area where you are either teaching the skill that they need, that students need, or you're helping them with strategies on how to practice certain skills. And then you have guided practice. And this is where you provide some wiggle room for students to actually practice the skills that they're learning during instruction. And of course, the activity leader or facilitator is supporting those students during that time. And then the last component of a lesson is, of course, that independent practice piece. And that's usually the most fun. This is where students demonstrate their understanding of what they have learned. And this is usually done without the assistance of an activity leader or facilitator. So as we plan lessons, we definitely want to make sure we keep a solid balance of these things so that, one, we're making sure that we are adhering to the plan, but we're also thinking about student engagement, right? You want to shake things up a little bit so that you are, one, prepared to support students or challenge students as you see fit. So that actually brings us into a different way we can help with guided practice, and that is differentiating that learning. So there are tons of different approaches that you can use to differentiate your learning, and we're going to speak to 3 different areas. You may differentiate learning with the content. So the activities that you are teaching, you can decide whether or not you should be supporting or challenging students and help them meet their interests as well. So for example, our cooking club activity, you may be thinking about students who are measuring or reading recipes. You may have a student who isn't ready to use fractions. You may be converting those units into ounces instead, or vice versa. If you want students to practice that measurement or division skills, then you would definitely think about different ways you can adjust the content of your activity. Another way you can differentiate learning is the process, right? So you can either make this process a little bit more simple, or make it more difficult so that students can improve their skills and work on those areas where they need to improve based on your conversation with teachers or other pieces of data that you are noticing when it comes to student needs. So in this case, again, we're thinking about our cooking club activity. We may be thinking about either limiting the ingredients to just 5 things, or to make it more complex, we may have 15 different types of ingredients, or maybe more, or maybe you would add in a new ingredient just to, increase the complexity of the activities process and procedure. If you are thinking about making a salsa for this cooking club, right? Maybe instead of students using pre-packaged items, you may have them think about using only raw ingredients. So there's a lot of different ways you can beef up this process when it comes to differentiating learning. Another area you can think about is the product. So if you are deciding to change the product in your activity, in this case, we're thinking about cooking club, you are thinking about the different ways students can show their understanding. So if you are working with younger group of students, the product might be a little bit different. You are also thinking about the skills that they're coming into your activity with, and you may realize that, well, these students aren't really ready to use a knife to chop up these ingredients. You may switch the entire product to maybe like a trail mix, or a recipe that doesn't require much chopping or using those kinds of tools. Another take on this is to beef it up a little bit, right? So maybe instead of making salsa, maybe you are requiring students to bake an item instead, which requires a lot more precision and a lot more, you have to pay a lot of attention to how you're measuring items. So there's a lot of different ways you can differentiate learning through the product. So in this case, we're really thinking about how well we should be supporting our students as well as challenging them. But also we're giving our students some choice in this process. So you may have students voice their interest in what content you are sharing with during the activity. You may provide students with the different choices in how they are completing their activity process or procedures, or you may have have students select what product they would like to use to showcase their skills, especially the new skills that they are learning. So we're going to take a closer look at the cooking club activity once again, and we're thinking about differentiation here. So let's say in our cooking club, we had one group in the cooking club that were finished early, and they say the activity was easy because some of them make salsa at home. How can we differentiate the learning here? Again, we're thinking about 3 areas: content, process, and product. How can we assist the students who are finished early? Because salsa making was easy. They have experience in this. So feel free to let us know in the chat. I'll give you a minute to decide. So again, you're thinking about what recommendations you would make to differentiate learning. And just drop that question in the chat. We also have a second scenario that I would also like for you to think about. If you have, you have 2 students in the cooking club who struggle with multiplying, how would you differentiate that learning there? Awesome. Yes. So in the first scenario, you can have this group become helpers, right? If you are thinking about the content here or the process, you may be adding in specific roles and responsibilities for students if they're working in a group. So if one group is, completely finished, then maybe they can act as a sous chef for a different group, right? So you're kind of having, yes, I was getting to that, peer-to-peer help, absolutely. And this helps keep all students active, especially the ones that like to finish early, but it also is very helpful for activity leaders and facilitators, right? Sometimes we may have an activity where students, they're calling your name and asking you all these questions, and sometimes they can get that same help from each other before coming to you about it. So thank you for sharing. Now, what about our students who are struggling with multiplying? And sometimes we would have to do this if we're making a recipe for a lot of people, right? So let's say, they struggle with multiplying, but they're pretty good in other areas. How can we support our struggling students? Right, yes. The early finishers can come and help the struggling students. Supply a math fact sheet. Yes, that can be very helpful, right? You can also be thinking about how you are modifying the content. So you may have a strategy sheet on how to convert these measurements so that it'll help them with multiplying, but also keep them engaged, right? Sometimes students, we actually want to give students a good area where they can practice these skills and not struggle so much, kind of give them an opportunity to be successful in a sense until they're ready to be completely independent. That's a great strategy to share. Thank you so much. Yes, we greatly appreciate your participation. And of course, I understand sometimes, we're taking notes, right? So as we differentiate the learning, we're also thinking about how we are delivering. So when we deliver these activities, there are 3 components that you should keep in mind as you are designing your activity and, of course, delivering this activity in a meaningful way. So in addition to delivering, differentiating learning, again, we want to make sure these activities are high quality. We're providing support to students who need it. We're also challenging students who are finishing early or who just need that extra push. We're also thinking about opportunities to embed new skills. So once students have learned a new skill, we're also thinking about other skills that we can add in there. So they may be practicing old skills or practicing new skills that are essential to what's to come. We're also encouraging higher levels of thinking. Now, this will come in handy, especially when you are challenging students to move away from, regurgitating all that information that they're either reading or researching or repeating from, the activity leaders to actually creating and evaluating and analyzing any information to deepen their understanding. So what we'll do is briefly touch on different types of questioning techniques that you can use to encourage higher levels of thinking within your students. And that includes questions around creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and remembering skills or facts that are needed in these particular activities. So, once you've asked a question that supports one of these areas, you're also thinking about the response you will get from the students. Are you going to ask a question that will eventually reinforce students' understanding or keeping them on track if they are off track? You may use different questions to probe for more information from students, just to make sure they're able to not only recall this information, but they're using that critical thinking skill as well. And of course, you definitely want to use questioning strategies to readjust or refocus your activity and making sure it ties back to those activity goals. So in the handout that I shared earlier, in the chat box, there is a Y4Y tool that you can use that can support effective questioning when it comes to your activity and how to engage students. So what we'll do is take a look again at the cooking club activity, and I want you all to think about different questions you would ask or form to promote that higher level thinking with students. So we'll just review just a few examples. And again, you can let us know your question in the chat box. So let's say you are observing this activity and the activity leader, made their observation and they made a suggestion to the students and they said it was too spicy and they recommended using more tomatoes or another fruit. So instead of the activity leader providing this suggestion to the students in the activity, what question would you encourage this activity leader to ask instead of providing a suggestion like this? And then also on the screen, you'll see some sentence question stems to get you started. So if you want students to think about their recipe, if it was too spicy, which one of these question stems would you use? What question would you ask or encourage the activity facilitator to ask in this moment? And like I said before, we're encouraging high level thinking. We kind of don't want the students to depend on our responses to a lot of things. So instead, we may ask a question that requires students to analyze their own recipe, right? What do you think? Oh, great one, Rebecca and Tanya. So you want them to think about their recipe, what they put into it. So you may ask, and I'm going to read the responses in the chat. What happens when, right? Do you want to frame this in more of a scientific thinking? You may ask like those if and then questions or have them use the statements. Why do you think it was too spicy, right? Have them think or analyze their ingredients. What would happen if you add more tomatoes or peppers, right? Now we're thinking about the ingredients. We're probably helping students think about the quantity that they're using as well. All right, that's a good one. The next quick scenario, the facilitator said, oh, your recipe was bland. I highly recommend that you choose 1 or 2 flavors to give it style. Instead of telling them what to do, again, what kinds of questions would we ask or encourage our facilitator to ask instead of providing this piece of feedback to the students? And this is where I would probably ask a question that's similar to Brad's, right? What would happen if? Vicki shared, why do you think it's too bland? What would happen if, right? Or in this case, we're also thinking about our palates, right? You may consider this to be bland, but what about other students? Maybe they don't think it's so bland, right? We're thinking about different, again, the ingredients, or maybe we're asking them to evaluate the ingredients or the recipes of other students, right? So again, that what would happen if would be a good question stem. All right, so these are just a few things just to keep in mind. Again, we're encouraging higher level thinking. So with that being said, we briefly went through all 4 measures of implementing with Fidelity. And again, we have a tool that not only provides a definition of each area, but also an example. And this is something that you can use yourself or with your staff to further help you with designing your activities and also provide a tool for them to use when it comes to making observations of these activities, right? What are our look-fors, whether it be focused on adherence, dosage, or engagement, or delivery. Right, and so our next step in the continuous improvement is collecting data. So there are a variety of tools that you can use to measure a student's progress and your program team's fidelity of implementation. So what we'll do is just briefly review these 3 measurement tools that you can use. And this is helpful to not only keep track of your activity, but also collect formal and informal data on how well your students are progressing. So if you are going to use observation checklists, this is something that will be most effective in determining whether or not this activity is being implemented with Fidelity. And of course, Y4Y, we have a ton of tools around this area that can be utilized. You are also using rubrics, and this is something that can be provided to both students and staff to give them a better understanding of the level of performance during this activity. So using rubrics can also definitely help with keeping everything consistent in terms of figuring out how data will be collected, for staff, but also it helps students understand, why are they getting the marks that they are receiving, right? They're thinking about how well they follow this recipe. So again, this is all about performance levels. And then of course, you can also use portfolios. So I mentioned before, this is a great, there's a ton of tools that you can use as formal or informal assessments. Portfolios is one of them. It also is a great tool to use to show progress over time. And of course, we have those examples that you can use from the Y4Y site. And again, this is a link to that tool is also found in the handout that we shared earlier. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Yana to take you through the last few steps of our continuous improvement process.
Thanks, Shanika. It's hard to believe we're near the end already. So with this in mind, we are ready to move to that next space, finishing up our continuous improvement process. Now we're ready to think about, okay, so what does all of this mean? How are we actually going to take all this information that we've looked at, all the work that we've already done, and then going to turn it into meaningful improvements in our program? And when we do analysis of our program design, what we want to make sure we do is that we use a variety of those measurement tools, as Shanika mentioned. And then once we have those measurement tools and we've looked at observations, we've looked at interviews, we've looked at student assessment scores, we've done all of those pieces, and that is where we make meaning from that data. And you can do that as part of a team. If you have somebody who is part of if you have your planning team, getting them together to look at the different kinds of data you have. And then we want to improve our programs in response to the specific data that we collected. And so when we do improvement, we really want to focus on, well, what do we know went well and what do we know needs improvement? And then really thinking about how do we use that information to improve our own program design. So if we think back to the example that we've worked through all day today, really looking at that cooking club. One of the things that you might know about that cooking club, or what you might do as you're implementing that cooking club, using some of those tools, we have the rubric that we'll use as the final assessment, but we also have other, we might do observations, we might do interviews or surveys to gather some information. And then you want to improve your program in response. So if you find out that a lot of students maybe struggled with adding fractions with different denominators, that's something you want to focus on, give students more practice with that. Maybe you need to step in and do some direct instruction to make sure that they get that main concept. So really using that improvement process to decide, the next time I do this, how am I going to do it even better, create an even more positive program or positive activity that really supports student learning, meets those gaps where they exist. So as we are coming to the end of our webinar, really thinking through everything we've talked about is, what measure of fidelity, if any, do you feel is the biggest focus for your program? So do you really need to focus on what you do to make sure all of your students have the right dosage? Is it an issue of adherence. Do you want to make sure that the implementation is really engaging, that students are getting a lot out of the learning experience? I'd love to hear from you in the chat box if there is a specific area that you want to focus on as you're thinking about improving implementation. I know as all great program leaders, you're collecting data all the time. So if you identify a problem with fidelity of implementation, what is it? Are your staff having trouble giving students enough time to participate in activities? Is there a dosage issue? Is it the fact that when activities are implemented, they're maybe not as exciting as you would like them or not as engaging as you would like them to be? We'd love to hear from you in the chat box if there's anything you are thinking about with respect to fidelity of implementation. We'd love to know what your focus is on, where you're heading next with your program design. As you're thinking about that, please also let us know if you have any questions. Everything we talked about today is related to what comes from our website. There are so many, countless, certainly hundreds of resources on our website now. And so we would love for you to check those out. Oh, Shannon mentioned that dosage is a huge problem. Yes, a lot of our students leave early. So how do we make sure that those students at least have some kind of learning? So if you can add a hybrid element, so maybe they can do part of the activity at home, that can be a great way to get around that, because we know sometimes, caregivers have to pick them up on their way from home from work, and it's just going to be the time that works best for them. So we know, and I'd love to hear how you're thinking about getting around some of those challenges and roadblocks that we all encounter all the time, because that's just the nature of the game. So please do check out our website if you haven't already. There is a wonderful click and go. If you're not familiar with our click and goes, those are 40 to 60 minute, really about, I'm sorry, the automatic lights went out. I'm sorry, it's now dark in here. So there is a great click and go. It's just a 40-minute learning experience about fidelity of implementation with lots more tools. We mentioned some of them today, but there are others. We also have so many other resources. You can just search the continuous improvement process or implementing with fidelity on our website, and there are countless resources there regarding this topic in particular, as well as really any other topic that you might be interested in coming from Y4Y. And as always, everything on our website is completely free and completely customizable for you and for your staff. So if you haven't been to the website in a while, now is the time. There's always so much more coming, and we have so many great resources and upcoming webinars like this one over the next month. So we always love to see you on our website. If you ever need to reach us, you can feel free to join our mailing list. So we have about a once a month mailing list. It's really easy to join Y4Y Insider. You just text Y4Y Insider to 22828. Text and data rates may apply, so you can just sign up by going to our website. We will email you once a month with updates on new courses and upcoming webinars. We also do interviews with leaders in the field, blog posts, and we have lots of new resources that are constantly coming onto our website. So there's a lot of fun to do. And of course, like everything is completely free. And we're not trying to sell you anything, because all of our resources are free. We won't spam you. You'll get one email a month, and sometimes an additional email if we have something special coming up. So please do consider joining our mailing list. As always, you can visit us at our website, y4y.ed.gov. You can also email us at y4yta@sciservices.com, and that is a monitored email. And Shanika is one of the people who monitors that to make sure that we can get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. Thank you all so much for taking the time. If you haven't clicked the feedback form, we would love for you to do that so we can find out how we did, what you're interested in hearing about next. We would really always love to hear your feedback, and it's a very short form. It'll take you less than 2 minutes.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you
I
all so
also,
much for joining
sorry.
us. Annette, thank you for the invitation. And Shanika, it's been a wonderful to be with you.
I also want to share that we have office hours this Thursday. So if you are having trouble with engaging students, that's also a great opportunity for you to ask your questions directly, and we can help you, whether it be learning approaches or addressing low engagement, especially if it's around dosage. I see that was a big problem for a few. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Annette.
Great. Thank you. I hope everybody has a good rest of the day, and we'll see some of you tomorrow, and all our Y4Y friends and family. We will see y'all next month, if not on the office hours later this week. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.